Your great-grandfather never sat in a meeting, he never answered an email, he never sat through a performance review, never updated a spreadsheet, never once explained to anyone what it was that he actually did all day. He climbed 200 feet up a Douglas fir with an axe and a rope, and he cut the top off of it while it swayed underneath him. And for that he was paid more in real, adjusted, honest money than most people with a college degree make sitting in an office today. That's not nostalgia talking, that's arithmetic. Because somewhere in the last 100 years, America made a quiet trade of its own. We traded skill for safety, we traded calluses for comfort, and we told ourselves it was progress. But the men and women in this video would not have understood the deal we made. They worked with their hands, they were paid for what those hands could do, and when the work disappeared, so did the wage, and so did the respect that came with it. These are 25 American trades that no longer exist. Every one of them paid better than the job you probably have right now. Before we start, one thing needs saying, because it changes how you'll hear everything that follows. When we talk about what these jobs paid, we are not talking about the number printed on the pay envelope. $1 in 1910 was not $1 today. What matters is what that dollar bought. A house, a family, a future, on one income, with no debt. And by that measure, the only measure that actually counts, the men in this video were doing better than we are. Keep that in mind as we go, because the numbers are going to sound small, and the lives they bought are going to sound impossible. Let's begin. Number 25. The ice cutter. Before the refrigerator, America ran on ice. Every summer, in every city, in every icebox, in every kitchen, the ice came from a frozen lake in New England, cut by hand in the dead of winter by men standing on a surface that could kill them. They worked with saws 6 feet long. They scored the ice into a grid like a chessboard, floated the blocks down open channels and packed them in sawdust in windowless warehouses where they'd keep until August. Fall through, and the current pulled you under the ice sheet. There was no coming back from that. It paid well because almost nobody would do it. And it built entire towns in Maine and Massachusetts whose only export was frozen water. Then the electric refrigerator arrived in American homes. Within a generation, the ice trade was a memory. The towns emptied. Nobody wrote it down. Number 24, the log driver. They called them river pigs, and they were the most reckless men in America. When the timber came down off the mountain, there were no roads to move it, so they moved it by water, floating tens of thousands of logs down a river in the spring flood and riding on top of them. A log driver's job was to keep the logs moving. When they jammed, and they always jammed, he walked out onto the pile, found the one log holding back the entire river, and cut it loose, and then he ran, across spinning, rolling timber in freezing water with 100,000 tons of wood coming down behind him. The good ones made more in a 2-month spring drive than a store clerk made in a year. Most of them couldn't swim. They said it wasn't worth learning. If you went in, it wasn't the water that killed you. Number 23, the Gandy Dancer. Every mile of American railroad had to be laid by hand, and then it had to be held in place by hand, forever. Track shifts. Heat moves it, frost heaves it, the weight of the trains walks it slowly out of line. Somebody had to walk that line and put it back. They worked in gangs, with lining bars, and because a rail can only be moved if every man moves it at the same instant, they sang. One man called, and the rest answered. And on the beat the whole gang heaved. That's where the rhythm came from. That's what a Gandy Dancer was. A man who moved the railroad with a song and a steel bar. It was brutal, hot, ruinous work, and it paid a working man a living wage in parts of the country where a living wage was not on offer anywhere else. The machines took it in the 1950s, the songs went with it. Number 22. The well digger. Every farmhouse in America needed water, and before the drilling rig, water meant a hole in the ground dug by a man with a shovel. Standing in it, he went down 30 feet, 40, sometimes 60, in a shaft barely wider than his shoulders, with a bucket on a rope and a boy at the top to haul the dirt. The danger was not the digging, it was the air. Carbon dioxide pools in the bottom of a deep hole, invisible and odorless, and a man breathing it simply goes to sleep. They lowered a candle first. If the flame went out, so would you. A good well digger could find water where 3 other men had failed. That was worth real money to a farmer whose entire life depended on the answer. The rotary drill made him obsolete in an afternoon. Number 21. The tanner. There is a reason tanneries were built downwind of every town in America. Turning a hide into leather took months, and it took chemistry that nobody had written down. Soaking in lime, scraping the flesh, working the skins in pits of oak bark and worse things than oak bark, and knowing by touch alone when it was ready. The smell was legendary. Tanners were social outcasts in almost every culture that ever had them. They were also, quietly, very well paid, because everything ran on leather. Harness, belts, boots, machine drive belts in every factory in the country. No leather, no economy. Industrial chrome tanning changed it forever. Synthetic materials finished the job. The knowledge, the touch, was never recorded, because the men who had it assumed there would always be someone to pass it to. There wasn't. Number 20. The Cooper. A barrel is a machine. Think about it. Curved staves of oak, cut at a precise angle, bound with iron hoops, holding liquid under pressure for years, with no glue, no nails and no seal. Nothing but the wood swelling against itself. The Cooper built that. By eye, with hand tools. And it did not leak. Everything America shipped moved in barrels. Flour, whiskey, nails, salt pork, gunpowder, oil. The entire oil industry is still measured in barrels because of the Cooper. That's why we say barrels per day about a substance that hasn't touched a barrel in a century. A master cooper was a made man. His apprenticeship ran 7 years. The steel drum ended it. Then the cardboard box, and an entire body of geometric knowledge held in the hands of men who mostly couldn't read, walked out of the world. Number 19. The Wheelwright. Before the Wheelwright, there was no America west of the Appalachians. He built the wheel that carried the wagon that carried the family. And a wagon wheel is a far stranger object than you think. It isn't flat. It's dished, slightly conical, so that it can take a side load without collapsing. The spokes are set at an angle. The iron tire is fitted hot, hammered on glowing, and then quenched so that as it cools it shrinks and pulls the entire wheel into tension. One wheelwright. One wheel, and if he got it wrong, a family died in the Nebraska snow. He was paid accordingly. The automobile ended him in under 20 years. And here's the thing that should bother you. We have his tools in museums, but almost nowhere do we still have anyone who can do what he did. Number 18. The piano tuner. At its peak, America was building hundreds of thousands of pianos a year. Every parlor had one. It was the television of its age, the thing a family gathered around. And every single one of them went out of tune, twice a year, forever. The tuner could not use a machine because the machine did not exist. He used his ear. He listened for beats, the shimmer between 2 notes that are almost, but not quite, the same. And he counted them. And he stretched the octaves slightly sharp at the top and flat at the bottom, because that is what a piano needs, and no mathematics will tell you how much. It took years to learn, and it could not be taught from a book. Radio came, then records. The piano left the parlor, and the tuner left with it. Number 17. The sign painter. Walk through any American downtown and look up. The ghosts are still there. Faded letters on brick, painted 100 years ago, still legible. A man made those, freehand, on a wall, standing on a plank. He drew a perfect letter with a brush and a marlstick and no ruler, in gold leaf if the client could afford it, and gold leaf must be laid on breathless. A draft in the room will take it off the wall. Sign painting was one of the best-paid skilled trades in urban America. A good letterer named his price because there were only so many hands in a city that could do it. Then came vinyl. A machine cuts the letters now in minutes for almost nothing. The ghost signs are still up there. They've outlived the vinyl by 90 years. Number 16. The Watchmaker. There was a time when the most complicated machine most Americans owned was in their pocket. Hundreds of parts. Springs the thickness of a hair, jeweled bearings. And it had to run in a man's pocket through summer and winter and not lose a minute a week, because the railroads ran on it, and a watch that was wrong got people killed. So there was a watchmaker in every town. He worked under a loop, in silence. With tools he often made himself, and he could take a movement apart and put it back together in an afternoon. Quartz killed him. A cheap crystal became more accurate than a lifetime of craft. It's one of the few trades where the replacement wasn't just cheaper, it was better. And that's exactly why nothing came back. Number 15. The Telegraph Operator. Before the internet, there was a network, and it ran on men who could hear. A skilled telegrapher didn't decode Morse letter by letter. He heard words. The sound came in and language came out at 40, 50 words a minute, hour after hour, and he could hold a conversation while doing it. They developed a fist, a rhythm as personal as handwriting. Operators knew each other by touch alone, across 1,000 miles of wire, and they talked to each other at night when the traffic was slow. It was the first chat room, and it was built out of copper. It was a respected, well-paid, white-collar job that required no college, and it admitted women decades before almost anything else did. The teleprinter took it, then the telephone. The last commercial telegram in America was sent in 2006, and almost nobody noted. Number 14. The Linotype Operator. Every newspaper in America, for 80 years, was assembled one letter at a time by a machine that Thomas Edison called the eighth wonder of the world. The linotype was a piano-sized contraption of 900 moving parts that cast lines of type in molten lead, hot at the operator's elbow at the speed he could type. And he had to compose it backwards in his head, spacing the line, justifying it, feeling the machine, with a pot of molten metal a foot from his face. Splashback was so common it had a name. They called it squirts. Linotype operators were the aristocracy of the print shop. Union, well-paid, untouchable. Then, in the space of about 10 years, offset printing and phototypesetting wiped out every one of them. There's footage of the last linotype shift at the New York Times. Grown men are crying. Number 13. The Pattern Maker. Here is the most invisible skilled trade America ever had, and the one that built everything else. Before you can cast a metal part, you need a mold. Before you can make the mold, you need a pattern. A perfect wooden model of the part, but not the same size. Metal shrinks as it cools, so the pattern maker built the model slightly larger than the finished part, a different amount for iron than for brass than for aluminium, and he added draft angles so the pattern could be pulled from the sand without collapsing it, and he did it all in wood, by hand, from a two-dimensional drawing. Every engine, every machine, every pump in every factory. It started as a piece of wood shaped by a man who could think in 3 dimensions and negative space at the same time. Computer design and 3D printing took the trade. The men who had it were among the highest paid workers in America, and there was never a headline when they left. Number 12. The Tool and Die Maker. If the pattern maker built the mold, the tool and die maker built the thing that stamps out 1,000,000 identical parts without ever varying by the width of a human hair. He worked to tolerances of 1/10,000th of an inch, by hand, with files. Nothing you own would exist without him. Not the car, not the can opener, not the phone in your hand. Mass production is not a factory. Mass production is a die, and a man made that die. It was the top of the trade ladder in American manufacturing. An 8-year apprenticeship, a wage that put a man solidly, unmistakably in the middle class, with a house, a boat, and a kid in college. The trade still technically exists, but the average American tool and die maker is now well past 50, and nobody is replacing him. That isn't a job that vanished. That's a job that's vanishing right now, while you watch. Number 11. The Millwright. A millwright was not a mechanic. A millwright was the man who could look at an empty building and put a factory in it. Before electric motors, every machine in a mill was driven by one central power source, a water wheel or a steam engine, and the power went out to the machines through a forest of overhead shafts, belts and pulleys, hundreds of them, all turning at once. The millwright designed that. He calculated the gear ratios, cut the wooden teeth, aligned the shafts across a building the length of a football field, and made it all spin true. He was carpenter, blacksmith, engineer and mathematician, and he was usually all four without a day of formal schooling. He was the best paid working man in the pre-industrial economy. And when the individual electric motor arrived, the entire logic of his trade, of central power and transmitted motion, evaporated in a single generation. Number 10. The Boilermaker. Everything ran on steam, and steam, contained badly, is a bomb. The Boilermaker built the pressure vessels that drove the locomotives, the ships, the factories and the power plants, and he built them from the inside. 2 men, one inside the boiler, one out, driving red-hot rivets through steel plate. The man inside held the backing bar in a steel drum, in the dark, being hammered. They went deaf, every one of them, eventually. Boilermaker's ear was a recognized condition long before anyone thought to pay for it. The wage was among the best in heavy industry, and it had to be, because the work destroyed you. Welding replaced riveting, boilers got safer, and the trade shrank to a shadow. Number 9. The Steeplejack. Somebody had to paint the top of the smokestack. The Steeplejack climbed it. Church spires, factory chimneys, water towers, and he climbed it without a scaffold, because there was no scaffold that tall. He drove pegs into the masonry as he went and built his own ladder upward, resting his weight on a peg he had personally hammered into a brick 100 feet in the air. There was no safety line, there was no net. He was, by his own trade's grim arithmetic, betting his life on his own workmanship every single time he took a step. Steeplejacks were paid the way you'd expect men who do this to be paid. Aerial lifts, cranes and helicopters took most of the work. The trade still exists, barely, and the men who do it are still, quietly, some of the most skilled climbers in the world. Number 8. The High Climber. In the old-growth forests of the Pacific Northwest, they needed a spar tree, one enormous trunk left standing to be used as a crane to swing the logs out. To make a spar tree, somebody had to go up and cut the top off. The high climber went up 200 feet on spurs and a rope, trimming branches as he went. At the top, he cut through a trunk the width of a car, and when the top went, tons of it falling free, the tree he was strapped to would whip back and forth through an arc of 10 feet or more. He rode it out. That was the job. He was the highest paid man in the camp, and every logger on the ground stopped work to watch him do it. Steel towers replaced the spar tree. Nobody has needed a high climber since. Number 7. The Powder Man. Every tunnel, every mine, every road cut through a mountain in America was made by a man who understood explosives better than he understood almost anything else. The powder man drilled the holes, judged the rock, decided the charge, set the delays, because a good blast is not one explosion. It's a sequence, milliseconds apart, so that each charge breaks rock into the space the last one made. Get the sequence wrong and you don't move the rock. You move the mountain onto your crew. He learned it from another powder man. Almost none of it was written down. He was paid more than the foreman, and everyone accepted that because everyone understood exactly why. Modern blasting is a licensed engineering profession now, with software. The instinct, the man who could read a rock face, is gone. Number 6. The Wildcatter. The oil roughneck of the early boom was not an employee, he was a gambler. A wildcatter drilled where the geologists said there was nothing. He worked on wooden derricks with cable tools, pounding a bit into the earth for months at a time, on land he'd leased with money he didn't have. The work itself killed people, constantly. Blowouts, fires, the drilling cables snapping and taking a man's leg. There were no regulations, because there was no one to write them. And the pay, for the crew, in a boomtown, was among the highest entry wages in America, several times what a factory hand made, because nobody sane would take the job. The boomtowns are ghost towns now. Number 5. The Locomotive Engineer. For about 70 years, the engineer of a steam locomotive was the most admired working man in the United States. Not the richest, the most admired. Children stood at crossings to wave at him. He had a name and people knew it, and it was earned. He controlled 150 tons of iron and fire, on rails, in the dark, in weather, with brakes that took a mile to stop him. And he did it on schedule and by feel. Reading the sound of the engine, the slip of the wheels, the pressure in the boiler, he got there by starting as a fireman, shoveling tons of coal into a firebox in a single shift, in a moving cab, in heat that would drop a man. It was a working-class job that carried genuine prestige, a combination America produces almost nowhere anymore. Number 4. The Hard Hat Diver. Before scuba, if you had to work underwater, you did it in a copper helmet bolted to a canvas suit. Breathing air pumped down a hose by a man on a boat who you had to trust with your life. The suit weighed close to 200 pounds on land. Underwater, the diver was almost blind, working by feel, salvaging wrecks, repairing bridge footings, cutting steel in zero visibility. If the hose kinked, he suffocated. If he ascended too fast, the bends crippled him. If the boat drifted, he was dragged. Almost every one of them was hurt, eventually. They were paid a fortune, and they were still underpaid. Scuba and remote vehicles replaced most of it. The trade survives in commercial diving, and it is still one of the best-paid jobs in America that requires no degree, and one of the most dangerous. Number 3. The Whaler. For 100 years, America lit its lamps with the oil of an animal that could kill everyone on the boat. The harpooner stood in the bow of a rowing boat, 30 feet from an animal the size of a house, and threw. And if he hit, the whale ran, dragging the boat behind it across the open ocean at speeds no vessel of the day could match. They called it a Nantucket sleigh ride. Then came the killing. Then the flensing, stripping the blubber alongside, in the water, with the sharks arriving. The crew was paid in leys, a fraction of the voyage's total profit. A harpooner's lay on a good 3-year voyage could set a man up for life. On a bad one, he came home owing money to the ship. Kerosene ended it. A cheaper light from the ground. Number 2. The Skyscraper Riveter. Look at any photograph of New York being built, and look at what those men are standing on. A riveting gang was 4 men on a steel beam in the sky, with no harness. One heated the rivets in a coal forge on the beam. One threw them, glowing, across open air. One caught them in a tin can. and one drove them home with a pneumatic hammer, holding on with his knees. They threw red-hot iron to each other 40 stories up, all day. They were mostly immigrants, and famously a great many were Mohawk ironworkers from Kanawake, who built a reputation for this work that lasted generations. They earned the highest wages in construction, and every man on the ground knew they deserved it. Welding and bolting replaced riveting. The photographs are all that's left, and we hang them on our walls like they're art, which they are. But they were also just a Tuesday. Number 1. The blacksmith. And at the end of the list, the oldest one. We remember the blacksmith as a man who shod horses. That's not what he was. The blacksmith was the only source of metal parts in a town. If it was made of iron and you needed it, a hinge, a plough, a wagon tire, a nail, a tool, a gate, a repair to any machine within 20 miles, you went to him and he made it. From a bar of stock. From nothing. He could see a thing in his head and put it into steel. He was, in a very real sense, the local manufacturing industry, and he was compensated like it. A smith owned his shop, his home, and his time. The factory took him. Then the automobile finished it. There are more blacksmiths in America today than there were 50 years ago. But they make sculpture and knives. Almost none of them make the thing the town needs. That job doesn't exist anymore. Nobody needs one man who can make anything. Here's what I keep coming back to. Every single one of these trades required a man to learn something that could not be looked up. It lived in his hands. It took years, and it was passed from one person to another, in person. And when it stopped being passed, it was gone. Not archived, not stored, gone. We tell ourselves that's fine because the machine does it better now. And often the machine does. But notice what else went with it. A man with one of these trades could support a family on one income. He owned his tools. He could not be replaced by the next person in the queue. He was paid for what he could do, not for how many hours he was seen to be present. Nobody ever asked a millwright to justify his role in a restructuring. I'm not saying it was better. Men died doing these jobs, in numbers we would not tolerate for a second today, and I'd not wish a single one of those deaths back. But I don't think we made a straight trade, either. I think we gave something up, and told ourselves it cost nothing. If your grandfather did any of these, or if there's a trade in your family that's gone now, and the knowledge went with him, tell me in the comments. Say his name, and say what he did. Somebody should still know. I'm going to keep digging these up as long as people want to hear them, because they were here. And they were extraordinary, and almost nobody remembers.